There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for this art history talk that will be focused on Peter Paul Rubens. And you might have noticed the tendency that during the past several talks, I've really been enjoying talking about artists from what used to be known as the Netherlands. So Holland. We spent several hours talking about Dutch artists that come from Holland. And today we're switching to the southern part of that region, and we will be talking about Flanders. Our talk today will be about Peter Paul Rubens, who's known as probably the greatest Flemish artist. And then our talk at the end of the month, on June 30th, will be about other Flemish artists who, all of them inevitably worked with Rubens and even took part in creating some of his famous paintings. What you see on your screen right now is one of the most famous views of Antwerp, and Antwerp was Rubens's hometown. We will be talking a fair amount about Antwerp. It played a very important role in his life. This is the main square, the cathedral square. I promise you that later today we will actually be going inside that cathedral because Rubens played a big role in the decor of the cathedral. And before we move on to talking about Rubens in particular, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about just the history of the region and remind you that the Netherlands, for a while, they were under the Spanish rule. And then in the middle of the 16th century, a part of the Netherlands, known as Holland, was able to separate from the Spanish rule. And at that point, we talked about the art that came out of that, the art that became known as the Dutch art, and all the incredible artists that were born out of that transition. And so the other part, Flanders, even though it was so incredibly close to Holland, it developed in its own unique way that ended up being very different from Dutch art and the art of Holland. When we talked in our previous lectures about the art of Holland, we talked about how the main consumer, the main customer, ended up being the people, because as the result of the revolution, Holland experienced the rise of the middle class and the upper middle class, the so-called burghers. Well, with Flanders, it was different because Flanders did not get away from the Spanish rule, and the art of Flanders was influenced by a different kind of consumer. Number one, it was the nobility, the people who thrived under the rule of the Spanish crown. It was naturally, of course, the Spanish royal family, and then the people who worked with them, the nobility, Spanish or Flemish nobility. And then another big consumer of Flemish art of that time, it was the church, of course. So a lot of the artwork that was commissioned at that time had to be created inspired by the religious subjects and stories from the Bible. And naturally, if you compare something that has to hang inside a church, especially a grand cathedral, as grand as what you can see here on your screen, which is the Cathedral of Our Lady of Antwerp. If you compare that with the art that you could possibly see inside of just like a home, of a middle-class person, of course that would be very different. So this is a little bit of a background that we have to understand when we talk about the art of Rubens. Once again, we are in the center of Antwerp. As I mentioned, this is Rubens's hometown. This is where he grew up, and this is where he started studying art. This is where he received his formal education, and this is where he had his first apprenticeships. One of the Flemish artists that was a teacher of Rubens and that taught him how to create artworks was Otto van Veen. You can see an artwork by that artist here on your screens. And it's quite interesting to compare this work of art with the works of art by Rubens that we are going to see later today as we move on with our conversation. This is a work that is in that state between Renaissance and Baroque. We see very clear features of Northern Renaissance in this work by Van Veen, which, by the way, is called The Artist's Painting Surrounded by His Family. So the one of the major features of the art of Northern Renaissance was meticulous attention to detail when it came to depicting people's faces. And when we look at the faces, we can really see every face is different. There is a lot of light and shade. There's a lot of attention to detail when it comes to depicting all of these people that surround the artist. There is a fair amount of attention to detail when it comes to the interior of the house, the beautiful tapestries that hang on the wall. Yet at the same time, you can also see a fair amount of stillness and a fair amount of decorativeness in a way. And actually, a lot of art critics, a lot of art historians believe that there was a period of art in between Renaissance and Baroque that they call Mannerism. You might have heard of the word Mannerism before in regard to Italian art. Basically, this is a very good example of Mannerism. The idea behind Mannerism is it's something that evolved from Renaissance art. And the main goal of Mannerism was to make beautiful works of art that are very decorative, very nice looking, but maybe don't necessarily have a lot of meaning behind them. Anyway, this is what we see here. This is a very decorative work. There are beautiful details. We can see how much attention the artist pays to the tapestries on the background, to painting the face of every person. But at the same time, we see this stillness that could be borrowed from Renaissance and will definitely evolve later in the works of Baroque artists. We will see that in Rubens. So this was one of Rubens's teachers, and our artist in focus today definitely went beyond these limits. The thing about Rubens is that even though he received his formal education and apprenticeship in Antwerp, in Flanders, and became a member of the Guild of St. Luke, which was the Guild of Artists. If you wanted to be a professional artist, you had to be a member of the Guild of St. Luke. His real education was really received by him in Italy, as in the year of 1600, Rubens took off on a big journey to Italy. And this is an incredibly important moment in his life. And Rubens started his journey in Venice. And I have to say that Venetian art, in a way, was quite different from the rest of Italian art, the classic Roman art that we can think of. And when Rubens spent some time in Italy, he was incredibly influenced by artists such as, for example, Titian, especially late works by Titian. Here on your screens, you can see a wonderful example of that. In this work by Titian, you can see a lot of movement, and you can see a lot of drama. And at the same time, I want to draw your attention to the brush strokes that Titian uses in his piece. A lot of art critics even later will compare this to Impressionism, because from the first glance, the painting even looks unfinished in a way, but that adds a lot more emotion. It adds a lot more dynamics to the piece. And of course, also Venetian artists were known for their colors, the bright colors that they use in their works. And I think this is another reason why this is a wonderful example of what Rubens saw in his first years in Venice. Another artist that he was really influenced by was Jacopo Tintoretto. And I think, to me, as well as a lot of other art critics and art historians, this work by Tintoretto is the iconic work that illustrates really well what he was all about, and how Tintoretto was one of the pioneers of Baroque, if I must say that. There is also a lot of movement in this painting. The perspective is very different. And the use of light and shade. We can see the scene of the Last Supper in a very dark room, and Jesus Christ, he is in the center of the painting. You can see that, but at the same time, this is not the place where all the lines cross. If you look at the table right here, this is sort of, the table keeps going into the depths of the room, and that's how, this is what creates this impression of movement here. At the same time, with the use of light and shade, you can definitely see that, of course, the figure of Jesus Christ is emphasized here. And these ideas of movement, the ideas of light, and very dramatic gestures, which you can see a lot of in this painting, were absolutely used by Rubens later in his career. So imagine being an artist who, got the education in art, got an apprenticeship from an artist like Otto van Veen, and then you go to Italy and you see these incredible works. Of course, they touch you. Of course, they make a great influence on how you see art. And then from then on, he goes on to see the art that is exhibited in Rome. And he gets to see the works by Michelangelo and Da Vinci, and of course Caravaggio, which I think together with Tintoretto and Titian probably had the greatest influence on Rubens's art. We will see a little bit of that more. And ultimately, Rubens doesn't just have a trip to Italy where he learns how to do art. No, he gets to work with one of the greatest members of Italian nobility. He gets to work for the Duke of Gonzaga and create a lot of artwork for him and his family. And you really get to see a lot of that Italian influence on his work later. But the thing about Rubens is sort of like one of the very first things that he became famous for was being a great copyist, using the best ideas that he could get from the works of art that he saw on his trip to Italy in his own pieces. We will see a lot of that. For example, this is Ewart that Rubens created while working for the Duke of Gonzaga. This is a state portrait, so to say, an equestrian portrait of the Duke of Lerma. And you can see the Venetian use of color there already, right? The painting by Titian that we just saw. You can see all the movement and the drama, right? Compare that with the piece by Otto van Veen that was very static. This one is very dynamic. How is this dynamic created? Well, it's the circular movement that we can really see in the painting that is created with the use of the clouds and the tree. It's wonderful. But then, this out. This on your right hand side, you can see the work by Greco, who was Greek by origin, also trained in Venice, but eventually ended up also in the Spanish court. I want to remind you that Flanders was dominated by the Spanish crown. He worked a lot for the Spanish, and he is one of the greatest artists of Mannerism or early Baroque, depending on what books you want to read. Anyways, the painting on your right is a work by El Greco. It's known as Saint Martin and the Beggar. And you can see an incredible amount of parallels here. Just the color palette, the equestrian figure, the contrast between the landscape on the background and the equestrian figure. Clearly, this work by El Greco played a very important role in the creation of the portrait of the Duke of Lerma. And we will see a lot of that in Rubens's works as we go on. He definitely uses the art that he sees during his trip to Italy as inspiration. Interestingly enough, the combination of the education that Rubens got back in Flanders, and just his quick wit, very sharp mind, creates a situation in which Rubens becomes not just an artist, but a diplomat. So as a diplomat, Rubens would go to Spain, for example, to England, other places, and while creating portraits of the high nobility, he would also be able to negotiate some of the diplomatic questions, which was quite an interesting thing. He also used the things he learned in his craft, of course, and I promised to show you how much Caravaggio influenced Rubens. And this is sort of a question for those of you who really like art and consider yourselves art experts. Can you tell which one of these works is Caravaggio and which one of those is Rubens? I'm gonna give you maybe a couple seconds to make up your mind, and I will reveal the answer for you here. Okay, so the work on the right is a work by Caravaggio. The work on the left is a work by Rubens, and you can clearly see, I mean, there's no doubt that there was a lot of influence here to not just the composition, but even the clothes that the characters are wearing. And if you look at the work on the right, which is a work by Caravaggio, the biggest difference between this work and the work by Rubens is the auditory impression from the painting. A lot of art critics, when they talk about the piece on the right, the piece by Caravaggio, talk about the certain impression of the crescendo in terms of sound when we look at this piece. Because if we think of the painting of the right as a diagonal line going from this person to the person on the right, it's like the sound is going from quietest to loudest. The loudest sound being the person on the right, you know, raising their hands to the sky and exclaiming really loudly, right? So it's all about this diagonal line. When we look at the work on the left, the work by Rubens, we really don't see that. There is no crescendo like that, even though clearly there is somebody there. And that creates maybe a feeling of greater intimacy here on the left. Rubens clearly perceives scenes from the Bible and these other important subjects in art in a different way, perceives them in his own way as a 16th, 17th century artist. And this painting was created in the early 17th century, but it is without doubt, he was greatly influenced by those Renaissance and Baroque artists. Besides that, Rubens realizes as a court artist that if he finds a successful angle to show a person through, successful tool in art, he can use it again and again and again when he creates those state portraits that he works so hard on. You can see one of the state portraits that Rubens creates here, and then in your next slide, a portrait of a completely different person, but you almost would not be able to tell the difference between the two ladies here. He uses those 3/4 turn here that conveys a certain feel of dynamic, right? And almost this momentary feel of a glance the lady is giving you. If you think of the perspective in both of these paintings, it really looks like we are looking at these gorgeous women from below, right? They are above us in both of the portraits. And finally, Rubens does not worry about how much time he spends on depicting the beautiful dresses of these gorgeous women. Ultimately, the works of Rubens are all about celebrating the luxury of life. And when it comes to state portraits, the luxury of life comes from the gorgeous fabrics that these women are wearing. And as you can see, the background here is very similar as well. This is some sort of ancient ruins with some drapery on the background. It sort of represents the eternal nature of their beauty, the eternal nature of the spirit, the idea that the ancient ruins represent. Anyway, now, you know, in this day and age, we would be able to see these paintings in galleries and in museums, but in the early 17th century, it was very different. Neither of the ladies would pretty much ever find out that Rubens created portraits of them that were so similar to each other. Because displaying their collections was not really a thing. Anyways, Rubens absolutely loves the time that he spends in Italy. He loves studying these classic works of art. He loves soaking in the culture, and of course, feels important when it comes to the diplomatic nature that some of his jobs entail as well. But unfortunately, eventually he finds out that his mother, who is back in Flanders, passed away, and it's time for him to come back home. Very reluctantly, he ends up coming back home. And the interesting thing that him coming back home, and as you remember, Flanders again was under the Spanish rule, entailed becoming the court artist for the Spanish crown in Flanders. But even the title of the court artist is not enough for him. And even though the Spanish crown offers him a gold chain, and then a special payment. So in addition of the to the regular payment that he would receive as a court artist, he would also additionally get paid for every work that he creates for the Spanish crown. That is not enough for Rubens, and he adds his own little condition to becoming the court artist. He says that he does not want to be wherever the royal residence is, and it was sort of moving in between two different cities. He definitely wanted to be in his hometown of Antwerp, and the crown even grants him that. He gets to go and live in Antwerp. And in Antwerp, he creates this gorgeous house. You can see a picture of that on your screen right now. And even on the website of that building, it says, this is just like a little piece of Italy in the heart of Flanders, because he misses Italy so much. And ultimately, this becomes Rubens's house. And even to this day, this gorgeous building is actually a museum known as Rubens House. And if you ever do find yourself in Antwerp, I highly recommend that you go there. It's incredible. But if you think that maybe you won't be going to Antwerp anytime soon, check out this incredible resource. So the museum has its own website, and on the website, you actually get to see a virtual tour of the museum. And in addition to just seeing incredibly good quality views of this museum, you also get a little audio tour in different languages. The blue goes for English, and when you click on the little blue circle, you actually can listen to the little audio guide of the museum. So I highly recommend that. You can either navigate around the house using these little circles, and you get to see the rooms where Rubens lived, as well as some of his art collection. It's an incredible museum. Or you can click on these arrows in the bottom and just sort of see it artwork by artwork. And you get to see some of the gorgeous paintings that Rubens has in his museum. I'm so glad that some of you were actually able to visit back in the day. This is absolutely lovely. But I will be honest with you, this is one of the best virtual tours that I have ever seen. It's incredibly good quality, and you get to listen about some of the artwork, and you get to see how people in the Netherlands, 17th century Netherlands lived, which I think is quite incredible. So on top of moving back home and getting a house, another important event that happened in Rubens's life was that he got married. Check out this gorgeous wedding picture that he created of him and his wife, Isabella Brand, which completely revolutionized the way that wedding portraits were created. When you think about wedding portraits, I want you to think of as the most basic two pictures of the bride and groom depicted in profile, sort of looking at each other. At the very best, the portrait of the Arnolfini family by Van Eyck. That's at best, the bride and groom in the same space looking at each other. That's like the best you can get. It's very, very different what Rubens chooses to show here. First of all, as you can see, it's called the honeysuckle bower. So it's the bride and groom are starting a family in this really, really cozy corner of the universe, so to say. It feels really cozy. It feels really safe and wonderful. But then on top of that, you really get to see them as human beings. So Rubens on the left depicts himself as a man of culture, a true philosopher, so to say. You know, he has this really thoughtful look on his face, and there's sort of a certain feeling of dynamic just in his pose. You know, he crosses his legs. Just he looks incredibly human here. But then you look at his wife, Isabella Brand, and she also looks very human. But I have to say, she looks a little bit different. She looks like this, like very playful woman. She looks at the viewer in this really flirtatious way. Both of them have this beautiful, youthful blush on their cheeks, and then there is just so much life. And then something completely unheard of. They're holding hands in the middle of the painting. And when you think of yin and yang, the ancient symbol of yin and yang, I personally can really see that in their painting, right? They together they create this circular shape, right? And then they connect as they hold their hands, which I think it's just like completely incredible. So clearly this is a couple in love, two people that are about to start a family in their little cozy corner of the universe. And when you compare, you know, these state portraits Rubens creates, just want to give you a little reminder, with what he creates a portrait of his wife, it's very different. You see a real person here. There's no more ancient ruins on the background. There's this beautiful reddish, blackish background that really kind of gives you an impression of, I would say when I see a background like this, it makes me think of just like a rich personal world, so to say, depth of thought and stuff like that. She's sort of looking at you again, maybe a similar flirtatious, playful way that I really like. So together, Rubens and Isabella Brand had several children. We will talk about one of them in a little bit. But even though we all know that Rubens wasn't necessarily very excited about coming back home to Flanders. Ultimately, I think he found peace here and lots of great career opportunities. And one of these great opportunities had a lot to do with the Portus Cathedral that we saw in the beginning of our tour here, because in the Cathedral of Our Lady of Antwerp, we can see two amazing pieces by Rubens. So you now can see the view inside of the cathedral, and on both sides of the altar, you can see two incredibly gorgeous triptychs created by Rubens. So if you find yourself in Antwerp, you can see two amazing works by Rubens right there inside the church. But they are huge, and it's better to look at them as a slide, really, not as a virtual view. The one I think evokes a lot more feeling in me is called The Descent from the Cross. And I mean, at this point, after all the influence that Rubens got during his trips to Italy and seeing works by Tintoretto, Titian, Caravaggio, all of these incredible Baroque artists, you can see that this piece, and especially the central panel of the triptych, is just quintessential Baroque. There's so much movement. You can see the diagonal line, which is at the center of the composition. And you can really see, first of all, you know, the people that take part in the descent from the cross, all create this really vivid composition. It's a beautiful, very dramatic scene. And then I want to draw your attention to the guy at the top right. He's holding the cloth covering Jesus with his teeth. Look at that. And again, this was not Rubens's idea. This was something he saw in the prints that he was able to see during his trip to Italy. The triptych was ordered by the Guild of Saint Christopher. And those of you who are familiar with the story of St. Christopher might know that Christopher was this man who carried people across the river. He was a big guy, very strong. And one day a baby came to him and asked him to carry him across the river. And as he kept doing it, he realized that the work became harder and harder and harder. And as he did not give up, he kept carrying the child across the river. And as he finished his work, he saw that it was actually Jesus Christ himself. And wow, does Rubens show Saint Christopher as this beautiful muscular man in his painting? You can definitely tell that the works by Michelangelo that he saw during his trip to Italy can really show in this piece. I mean, what an athletic, strong man we can see here. There was this quite a challenge for him artistically, because, as I said, the work was ordered by the Guild of Saint Christopher. But it wasn't really conventional to depict St. Christopher in a triptych like that. So what he did, what you see on your screens right now, is the outside of the triptych, right? The triptych could actually close. So this is the outside of the triptych. On the left door, you can see a depiction of St. Christopher. And on the right is the elder who baptized St. Christopher after all that happened. And actually, the name Christopher really means he who carried Christ. And if we go back to the triptych itself, we can see basically in all of the parts is people carrying Christ in many different ways. The central and the right parts of the triptych are pretty obvious, right? In the center, people are carrying the dead body of Christ. In the right, they are carrying Christ as a baby. And what we can see on the left, this is a meeting of Mary and Elizabeth. And Mary was obviously carrying Christ as she was pregnant. So everybody here is carrying Christ. And in a way, this is a dedication to the Guild of Saint Christopher. So this is one of the two triptychs that you see there in the cathedral. And the other one is ascent of the cross here. So what happened before the descent. And again, you can see so much dynamics here. There you can see a similar diagonal line here again, a lot of movement, a lot of muscle, a lot of drama. And I also want to draw your attention to the background here as well, as all the clouds and the different colors in the sky also really reflect the general mood of the painting. So these are the two lovely triptychs that you can see in the cathedral. Unfortunately, Rubens did outlive his wife, Isabella Brand. She passed away, but the past decade, a couple decades of his life was connected with a different woman we will talk about in a little bit. I want to show you this gorgeous hall in the Hermitage Museum that is dedicated to the works of Rubens, and just talk about several pieces by him that I would say mean a lot to me personally. As you know, my my major focus when it comes to art history and really what evoke my personal love for art history was the Hermitage Museum. So of course, I cannot skip that. And in the Hermitage, we have a absolutely incredible collection of works by Rubens. And I want to show you this work that is called Perseus and Andromeda. It's a story from the ancient mythology, which was quite popular with Baroque artists, because when you think about it, I mean, in Baroque, they often chose subjects that would evoke excitement, and interest, so to say. Andromeda was kidnapped and was chained to the rock. And just the idea of that alone, of a beautiful young woman chained to the rock, was always very exciting to the Baroque artists of the time. So Perseus as a hero riding this gorgeous horse, the Pegasus, comes and destroys Medusa and releases Andromeda, and you can see that in the painting. But what art critics especially like Rubens's interpretation of the story form is his skillful depiction of this youthful body of Andromeda. And here is where we really get to talk about the techniques that Flemish artists used, because when you look at the Flemish works of art of that time, what you really get to see a lot is white bodies, white to the point that they shine through the painting. And I think you can pretty well see that in this painting, in the body of Andromeda. And this comes from a certain technique that they used. So when Flemish artists created their works, they always started with white background. And then oftentimes this white background would be covered with a layer of lacquer. And only on top of the white background with the lacquer would they create a sketch on the canvas. Once they added extra color and the major composition to the painting, oftentimes they would add another layer of lacquer before they added the finishing touches. And when it came to these incredibly bright parts of the paintings, such as the body of Andromeda here, you can really see the glow that comes from the skin. And I mean, one of the most iconic things that is known about Rubens is his attention to female beauty and the female form. And the technique that Rubens was not the only one who used that. Other Flemish artists used that as well, but the technique of white background with intense amount of lacquer is what really adds to it. And when it comes to female beauty, I also really want to show you this lovely piece that is called The Union of Earth and Water here. Now, art historians believe there's more to it than the union of earth and water. Because of the Spanish rule, Flanders did not have access to this major waterway known as the Scheldt. You can see that on the screen here. And the idea that Flanders should have that access is sort of what's inspired the painting, but ultimately this work is all about the contrasts. It's all about the male and the female. I'm just gonna try to get a little bit closer to it. It's all about the male and female, and the contrast between the two worlds. And Rubens himself, you know, of all artists, Rubens actually left a lot of evidence of his thinking, because you can even buy letters of Rubens as a book. You can learn a lot about what he believed in as an artist. And so when it came to depicting the male and female nature, Rubens really believed that they should be depicted in a certain way. And he believed that round is female, angular is male. And you can really see that in this painting. Round, pale, smooth is the female figure, or the earth in the painting, and then muscular, tanned, angular in a way is the male figure. The water in the water figure, we can also really recognize Poseidon or Neptune, with the other water creatures going sort of like through the bottom of the painting. And when we talk about the figure of the earth, we can see the elements of abundance to its left, like the beautiful fruit and flowers and such. And yes, the immediate context of the painting is political and trying to express how important it is for Flanders to get access to a particular body of water. But really, it's also about, again, this yin and yang, and the celebration of the abundance of life. And really, when I personally think about the art of Rubens, what I think about is that celebration of life, the beauty of the female body, the strength of the male body, and all of the abundance that life gives to us. I feel like that I can really get that sense from the works by Rubens. Another interesting work from the Hermitage that I want to show you is a very mysterious one. I mentioned earlier that Rubens and Isabella Brand had several children, and a girl was one of them. Her name was Clara Serena, and she died very young. And a lot of art critics and Rubens biographers believe that even though she died quite young, sort of the ghost and the image of this little girl haunted Rubens for the rest of his life. Let me show you an actual portrait of Clara Serena here in the slideshow. So this is her as a little girl. And here is another painting that is surrounded by mystery. Officially, it's known as a portrait of a lady in waiting to the Infanta Isabella. But some art critics believe that this is actually a portrait of Rubens's daughter, the way he imagined her as a young woman, which, again, we saw state portraits created by Rubens, and then we even saw the portrait of his Isabella Brand, his first wife, that Rubens created. I mean, this is very, very different. There is just a certain difference in the brush stroke, a certain gentleness that you see here. There's a certain special attitude that the artist has to this young woman that makes some art critics believe that, again, this is him imagining what his daughter would be as a young woman. Some other art critics believe that this is him creating a portrait of his second wife. His name was Helena Foreman, and you can see a portrait of her here in Rubens House. His second love, and that love story is incredible as well. Rubens met her when he was in his 50s, and she was only 16. And art critics believe that she was the inspiration behind Rubens's famous depictions of female beauty, about which I wanna show you a couple of examples of the wonderful female beauty that Rubens depicts. For example, this is a scandalously famous one known as Susanna and the Elders. The story behind it is that Susanna was this young, beautiful woman. She was changing or maybe taking a bath, and these two older gentlemen saw her, and basically they said to her that either she agrees to make love to them, or they would tell the rest of the community that they saw her committing adultery with another man. And I mean, this is quite a delicate subject. And the way that Rubens approaches it here in the painting is with a lot of emotion and a lot of realness, right? When you look at Susanna's face, she is legitimately scared. When you look at her body, the way she turns it, she is mortified. It adds the element of real life to the painting, to the point that the excitement that Rubens is able to create is, you can see how this could be entertaining in a way to the viewers of the time. Another wonderful work. It's one of Rubens's earlier works, actually. You can see the date is 1600. So this is when he just started his journey from Italy. And this painting known as Leda and the Swan actually is a copy from one of the works by Michelangelo that is lost. We don't get to see the original work by Michelangelo, but we do get to see the work by Rubens. And basically, I mean, some people say that ancient Greek myths is really just the story of love told with the means of the myth. But basically, Zeus was in love with Leda, and he came to visit her in the body of a swan. And you see this kind of like passionate lovemaking between a woman and a swan. And you also see if you know Michelangelo's Last Judgment and those gorgeous frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, you can tell this is a similar body type, and that is a copy that Rubens created from works of Michelangelo. Finally, I want to show you one of the last works by Rubens at the Hermitage. Another work created on the ancient mythology subjects, but completely different, known as Bacchus. And Bacchus is known as the god of winemaking. Dionys is another name you might know him as, and often Bacchus is depicted as a gorgeous young man, just sort of running around dancing with a glass of wine in his hand, having fun. Rubens shows him completely different in this piece. Some of Rubens's biographers say that towards the end of his life he had gout, and maybe here Rubens shows a man burdened by a disease from having too much fun in his life. And just look at the look on his face. It's just the look of like, I'm so tired. I need a glass of water. You know, he's so tired. And everything else in the painting is just like utmost chaos. You can see the woman, she's pouring wine into the glass, but then there's drops going into this little baby's mouth. The baby in the bottom is peeing, and then if you look at the at Bacchus's feet, they're sort of resting on this animal, and the animal also looks either sick or drunk, or you can't even tell. But anyway, this is a depiction of utmost chaos that unfortunately characterizes the end of Rubens's life. Yes, he found his second love. He was really happy in his second marriage. His second wife and him had children and a happy life, but at the same time, gout really did negatively affect his life. He even had a hard time holding a paintbrush in his hand. But you know, when we think of the works by Rubens, we still, I think this is the odd one out, this painting. We think of the wonderful celebration of life and its abundance and all the pleasures that life has to offer, and that is why I absolutely love works by Rubens. So even though this is the last painting that I wanted to show you today, I do want to end this talk on a happy note and talk about how works by Rubens in general are about the celebration of life. And I would love to answer your questions. Please feel free to either drop them in the chat or unmute yourselves and ask me. I want to tell you that, well, if you have questions, if you're typing them, I want to tell you that our next talk will be, which will be on June 30th, will also be about Flemish artists, and it's called Beyond Rubens. So we will be talking about the artists that are known as those who associated themselves with Rubens, like Van Dyck or Snyder's or Jordan's, and some other gorgeous artists that maybe we don't know enough about. So I'm very excited to share with you about those artists. So that will be on the last Friday of the month, as originally scheduled, Beyond Rubens. All right, I'm just trying to see if we have questions. If not, then I will just wish you a good weekend and thank you for joining me today. I'll give it just a minute, another minute. If any of you are typing, I just want to say thank you again for joining me today. Apologize for skipping the tour in May. Life was a little hectic at that time, so I appreciate you being flexible. All right, well, looks like we do not have questions, which is absolutely okay. Thank you. Just some good feedback in the comments. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Stephen. As I said, I'm recording this. I will upload this on the YouTube channel and share it with the receivers of the newsletter. But I want to thank you personally very much for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.